It's time now for Perspective, and today our guest is Piotr Smolar. His book, titled Mauvais Juif, or Bad Jew in English, has just been published here in France. He's been a reporter for Le Monde newspaper in Jerusalem, and he comes from a long line of pensmiths and journalists. His grandfather was a communist resistance hero in the Minsk ghetto before escaping the atrocities of the Nazi regime, while his father fled the growing anti-Semitism and the student crackdown of 1968. Poland. Thank you very much for coming in to talk to us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I want to talk about the book, first of all. The title, Mauvais Juif, is quite provocative. What did you mean when you chose that title?
Well, first, I think that the first explanation is that this title is about my own ignorance, about my father's ignorance and my grandfather's lack of knowledge on what Judaism is. We are not a religious family. We've never celebrated Shabbat. And our knowledge about Jewish culture in general is very, very weak. But I think that on the second level, the title Bad Jew refers to a sort of blackmail on solidarity with Israel. It's this idea that every Jew in the world, in the diaspora, whether he lives in France, in Great Britain, or in the United States, has to agree with what the Israeli government says or does. That because Jews are one big family, they should stay united and not appear divided. And I think this idea is wrong. I think we should have a conversation on where Israel is heading. And this book underlines the fact that, for example, there is this discussion going on in the United States, as you know, with liberal Jews. But in France, I don't really read it and I don't hear it, this conversation.
Now, what reaction have you had from the Jewish community following the publication of the book here in France? How much of a break is this book from normal Jewish thinking, so to speak?
Well, I've had many letters, emails, messages from readers, not from institutions, because I'm not going to say in a provocative way that I don't care, but the most important thing for me is the reaction of readers, of French citizens in general, or foreigners who speak French. And this is what matters. What strikes me the most is that is the sense of relief that I read in those reactions. Relief because, of course, it's a very personal story, as you mentioned, history of my family, and it's also a book about Israel today and the worrying state of its democracy. But also, I think it's a book which celebrates multiple identities, which says you can be Jewish, but also you can be something else. You don't have to choose one loyalty over others. You can be many different things at the same time, and you don't have just to fall in line and blindly support anything that the Jewish state or the Israeli government does.
Now, you worked, of course, for 5 years in Jerusalem as the correspondent for the French daily Le Monde. In this book, or in other interviews that I've watched, you spoke of having no real concrete link to Israel, but yet you chose that as the place to go and cover events.
Sure, but you could have mentioned the fact that before that I worked for years in the post-Soviet space. I lived in Moscow for 4 years, so I didn't have any personal link with Russia. Nevertheless, I spent a lot of time there, and I'm very fond of the country. So I went to Israel without having sort of emotional instinct, emotional link to this country. Even though my grandfather moved there at the beginning of the 70s, when he had to, with a heavy heart, he had to leave Poland because he was kicked out of the Communist Party. He was kicked out as the head of the main Jewish newspaper published in Yiddish. So he moved to Israel and he died there and he's buried there. So I can't pretend that I have absolutely no family link to Israel, because that would be foolish of me. But I would never say that Israel is my country.
But you lied during your work as a journalist in Israel about being a Jew.
Yes, definitely. I did it for several reasons. Definitely not out of shame because of where I come from, but mostly because it was much more convenient for my work. because I didn't want first my conversations on the Israeli side or on the Palestinian side to be hijacked by another conversation on my own origins. People would, if I were to say from the very beginning, oh, by the way, I'm a Jew and here are my questions, then the people's reaction would be, but why does he ask those questions? So he belongs to one of the two camps. And the second problem would have been, of course, security, because I spent a lot of time in Gaza. I've been there numerous times, especially during the last year because of the March of Return on the border with Israel. And it would have been very difficult to go there if it was a known fact that I'm a Jew on the Palestinian side, but also on the Israelis, because, as you know, the Israelis control the main access points to Gaza.
And just one very quick final question. We are now, of course, on the eve of a crucial general election in Israel. Do you think that this, or are we about to see the end of the Netanyahu era in Israel?
I'll tell you shortly, we will all be much wiser tomorrow evening. That for now it's very hard to tell, but things look very stable compared to the elections in April. But the fact that Avigdor Lieberman, who represents the Russian voters, is ready to stab Netanyahu in the back and not support him might make a great difference in this election.
Okay, Piotr Smolar, thank you very much for coming to talk to us here for our Perspective segment. Your book, of course, Mauvais Juif, has just been published here, only in French, apparently, for now, not in English yet.
For now, but I'm looking for an English publisher if someone's watching.
There you go. Any publishers out there? Mauvais Juif exists, though, currently in French. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. Thank you.